is the World According to ZIG podcast for May 19th, 2019. My name is John Ziegler. I'm the host of the show where you can still get the truth about the news of the day from a conservative perspective in this world turned upside down. Our website is www.freespeechbroadcasting.com. That's freespeechbroadcasting.com. That's where you can find all of the past episodes of the World According to ZIG podcast. And I urge you to go to freespeechbroadcasting.com for the easiest way to access our other podcast, which we do twice a week, which is the Individual One podcast, which is focusing on the presidency of Donald Trump. So most, although not all, of the Donald Trump-related news will be exclusively on the Individual One podcast, which you can find either via my Twitter handle or freespeechbroadcasting.com. Today's episode of the World According to ZIG podcast is going to be a little bit different for a couple of reasons. We're going to do Ask John Anything, which we've not done in a very, very long time. For the 13 people who are very well acquainted with my long and very mediocre media career, the Ask John Anything segment has quite a history. I was actually fired over the Ask John Anything segment back in Louisville, Kentucky, and then sued for like a couple $1 million over something that occurred during the episode of Ask John Anything that resulted in my firing, although I was rehired by the very same company here in Los Angeles and ended up meeting my wife and getting married and having 2 kids, so I guess it all turned out in the end, although we might want to hold judgment. I'm sure my wife wants to hold judgment on that until it's all said and done. But, I should probably do Ask John Anything more often, but there's just been so much going on. I just thought, okay, this is a pretty good week to do an Ask John Anything. And so I asked people for their submissions, and I got bombarded. I frankly got more submissions than I anticipated. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to all of them. If I don't, I will attempt to do this again at another date in the near future. I did expect that a lot of the questions were going to relate to Leaving Neverland, the HBO fake documentary about Michael Jackson's alleged sexual abuse, which we've been focused on for the last couple of months. And I was not surprised that many of the questions are related to that. I will try to mix those in as we go. Part of why this was, I decided this was a good time to do it, is that someone asked me a question about last week's podcast, where at some point during my diatribe, I explained why I am different than most commentators. And part of why I am different than most commentators is that I really don't care about adulation from the public. I don't care about money very much. I don't care about fame hardly at all because I'm married. And, that doesn't do any good when you're married, because frankly, the most important, or from a man's perspective, the greatest benefit of being famous is that women that would normally not have sex with you will have sex with you. So that doesn't matter to me now that I'm married. And because I don't like people, human adulation is of no value to me. I mean, there are only a couple people on the planet whose respect I really value. And that's because I don't like human beings. I think humanity is exceedingly flawed. Homo sapiens are a horrible species. And so why would I live my life wanting affirmation from humans that I don't know and who I don't like, don't respect, don't think highly of? Because I think the average human being is crap. I think the average human is not honest, not smart, not courageous, is not interesting, not talented, has very little going for them. And I'm hardly perfect. That's by the way, that's why I know the average human being is not worthy of praise or caring about whether they have admiration for you, because I know myself. I'm very mediocre. But I am a hell of a lot better than the vast majority of human beings that I've come in contact with. So I was asked, why do you hate humanity? So I guess that's probably the best place to start off on this edition of Ask John Anything. Obviously it's an answer I could probably spend numerous episodes of The World According to Zig discussing. But the short answer to that is I have lived a very, very interesting life where I've met a lot of people in a lot of highly unusual circumstances. A lot of people who are considered to be the cream of the crop, the best of the best, people who are thought of very, very highly by society. And I have found almost all of them to be corrupt in some way. Now, that doesn't mean I expect people to be perfect, because no one is perfect, and I'm far, far, far from perfect. But I have found the average human being, even among the so-called elite, to be not worthy of praise, not worthy of admiration, not worthy of giving a damn about what they think of you, especially when you don't even know them. And I've also been screwed over by some of the allegedly best people in the world. Best, not maybe even in the world, but certainly within the societies that I was living. I've been screwed over many, many times by people who I was at the time shocked by. I'm not shocked now because I expect that. I expect anyone is capable of screwing you over because people will always do what's in their self-interest. In fact, the only way you should really trust a relationship, and this sounds cynical as hell and depressing as hell, but it's true, is if you have leverage over that person and that person knows that you have leverage over them. That's about the only relationship you should really trust. And even then, you should be wary because they might be too dumb to fully understand it, or they might change their mind, or something else might happen. But the bottom line is people are not to be trusted. And that's why I don't like humanity, because I'm someone who really believes in the truth, who is honest to a fault, who is incredibly loyal, and who will not do something that's in my self-interest if I think it's also wrong. Again, hardly perfect. But in my experience, and in my 52 years, I have been in situations that have been far, far, far more able to discern the nature of humanity than most people. I put myself in weird circumstances. I put myself in foxholes with a lot of people, and you find out a lot about people in a foxhole. And in the vast majority, not all, but in the vast majority of cases, what you find out is that those people are not worthy of giving a crap about. And so that's why, in the short run, in the short answer, why I do not like humanity. All right, now to more specific questions. Jason via Twitter asks, I know it's a ways off, but what are you going to do with the Individual One podcast if Trump loses in 2020? I don't even know if I'm going to be able to do the Individual One podcast through the 2020 election. I have no idea. That is going to have mostly to do with what the Global Story Network decides to do with their network, as it's just beginning now. Basically, Individual One podcast is the first podcast to get up and running within the Global Story Network. So it basically depends on what the Global Story Network decides to do with podcasting in general. And so 2020 seems a long way off. I would love to continue to do this podcast and the Individual One podcast through the 2020 election. But I got to tell you, it's funny that Jason asks, what am I going to do if Trump loses? I'm more concerned about what I'm going to do if Trump wins. Because if Trump wins, I believe I will probably retire from public life. That's not a threat. That's not like I'm going to move to another country if Trump wins again. That has nothing to do with it. That's just me deciding, you know what, at that point, there's really no point to me continuing on. There's no point for me to be screaming, about when no one's listening, when it doesn't matter. And we will have, if Trump wins re-election, we will have left the gravitational pull of the rational earth to such a degree that there's no going back. And at that point, you might as well just, you know what, to use the old cliche that Bobby Knight got destroyed overusing, when rape is inevitable, you might as well just sit back and enjoy it. Well, in a weird way, if Trump wins re-election, I'm not going to keep banging my head against the wall, especially when I'm getting paid no money to do it. So I will probably, again, you never know what's going to happen until it happens, but my guess is if Trump wins, that'll probably be the last you hear of me. Whether it's writing, podcasting, whatever it is. I mean, again, who knows what might have occurred between now and then. to give me some other passion to continue to have a voice regarding. But politically, at least, if Trump wins, that's probably the end of my political commentary. And Jason also asked, does being on Twitter help you with your writing, or does it get in the way? It's both. It's very time-consuming. I spend way too much time on Twitter. The worst part is that I actually feel compelled out of my conscience to respond to people, which is a really dumb idea because you think humanity in general is bad. Humanity on Twitter is way worse. That's the worst of the worst. And I have kind of changed my policy towards that. I still respond to people if they have legitimate inquiries on Twitter, but especially the Trump-tards, I've mostly just muted all the Trump-tards. I have a hierarchy. First you get muted, then you get blocked. And I would say most of the Trump-tards, which I still get a lot of Trump-tard reaction, have been muted to this point. And so that's because I can't see them. If I can't see them, then I don't respond. So that kind of has taken care of that. But it does help a little bit in that you're able to keep abreast of what's happening in the news more quickly, get reaction to it. That helps a little bit. So if you know what you're doing, it can help. But by and large, it's probably a negative because it does take an awful lot of time. Kamer X, I don't even know who Kamer X is, on Twitter asks a bunch of questions, most of which are far too detailed to get into on this episode of World According to Zig. But they do ask, why do you often fall out with your peers and other industry professionals? That's a great question. Obviously, each circumstance is unique and has its own reasons. But I would say that the number one reason is that I don't buy into the game, into the scam. See, this is all a scam. Everything in the news media is now a scam, especially talk radios. Talk radio is a total scam. That's been a large part of my career. And so if you're not accepting of the scam and you're not beholden to, what keeps people in the scam. If you don't want to think of it as a scam, think of it as the mob. All right? So and I've already referenced this with regard to my view of humanity. Because I'm not motivated that much by money or by fame, and I don't care about adulation, and my position doesn't matter to me. I've been fired so many times, it doesn't matter. I don't care. I don't care. I've already accepted who I am. I've already accepted that my career is effectively over. I've referenced myself as a dead man talking before, and which gives me the freedom to actually tell you the truth. And as long as some people care about that, then, and I have the option to do it, I'll probably still do it. But barely, because I don't care that much. I'm passionate about the issues, but I just don't care. And so when you don't care about making sure that the scam continues or that the mob doesn't get broken up, then you are far more willing to go fuck yourself. And you're not going to put up with as much. And so that's probably the core reason why I have had falling out, because what prevents falling out in most circumstances, especially with powerful people, is you don't want to burn bridges, right? Because they might be able to help you in the future. Well, I don't give a shit about that. I don't care, because I don't trust anyone's going to help me in the future anyway. I don't care about these people. I don't like them. They're all frauds. And so you only live once, and I'm going to call it like I see it. So that's probably the core reason for why that has happened. PJ asks, at this point, is there anything on God's green earth that would make you even remotely supportive of Don the Con, meaning Donald Trump? And I mean anything. Well, I would be somewhat supportive of Donald Trump if he was running against Bernie Sanders head-to-head in a presidential campaign. As bad as Trump is, I think Bernie Sanders would probably be worse. That doesn't mean I would vote for Trump. I'd have to decide, not that my vote matters here in California or that my opinion matters nationally, but from whatever it's worth, from a principle standpoint, I would probably just sit that one out. I might be somewhat rooting for Trump to beat Bernie Sanders, but other than Bernie Sanders and maybe a couple of the other candidates on the Democratic side, I cannot imagine anything that would have me supportive of Donald Trump. And it's not on a policy issue. It's who we are as a people standpoint. And the number one issue there is the truth. He doesn't care about the truth. He's destroyed the truth, and he's destroying our system of government all for his own selfish purposes. And to me, other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play? By the way, I'm thinking I should probably change other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play to other than that, Mrs. Kennedy, how was the trip to Dallas, right? Or is it still too soon? Is it still too soon for that? I mean, at what point are you allowed to make that transition from Mrs. Lincoln to Mrs. Kennedy? 1963, is it still too soon? I don't know. Kevin, our producer, grimaced when I said that. So maybe it is still too soon to go with Mrs. Kennedy. How was the trip to Dallas? So maybe we'll keep it with Mrs. Lincoln. But that's the point. The point is that, for me, that's a deal breaker. That will always be the biggest deal breaker with regard to Donald Trump. One of the many questions regarding leaving Neverland came from Samuth. Samuth asked, what made you question leaving Neverland? How did that change your perspective on the allegations on Michael Jackson? What are your thoughts about the MJ allegations and how the media dealt with it? Is the media trustworthy? Well, no. The media is not trustworthy, partially because they're corrupt and mostly because they're a bunch of idiots, imbeciles. They're also cowards. And they will do whatever it takes to protect their own gig, which is partially why I always get in confrontations with them, because I don't give a shit about protecting a gig, because I've lost more than most, and guess what? Still standing, still surviving, and my life is just fine, thank you. As far as what made me question leaving Neverland, well, I'm always questioning anything that doesn't make a lot of sense right off the bat, and the allegations of Wade Robson and James Safechuck are inherently suspicious because of the timing and the details. But to answer the question more specifically, I would say the reaction of the moms in the first part of Leaving Neverland made no sense to me. And I'm a big believer in looking at the moms and the girlfriends of sex abuse allegations, especially by men. And the thing about the moms that caught my attention right off the bat was, wait a minute, why are you speaking, especially in the case of Wade Robson's mom, Joy, why are you speaking at the beginning of this documentary with a smile and in a joyful fashion about Michael Jackson and how it is that you came to know him and your relationship with him? How does that make any fucking sense whatsoever? And people are really bad at this. And I mean, even the director of the film, I don't think fully comprehended this because he's not very bright. But when you're doing the interview after. This is an interview after everything has allegedly happened and after she allegedly knows that her son was brutally sexually molested by Michael Jackson for 7 years. So this is not a contemporaneous interview. If this was an interview done at the time and she doesn't know about the allegations, okay, that would make sense. She's thrilled that her son's becoming friends with Michael Jackson because she's a stage mom and she's a big fan of Michael Jackson. But this is an interview done years later. Same with James Safechuck's mom, who did this horrible acting job pretending that she was happy when Michael Jackson died, even though there's no evidence, even by James's own story, that she would have known at that time that Michael Jackson had abused her son or was a sexual abuser at all. So the mom's reactions make no sense at all. And that was the first thing that made me go, okay, this could very well be bullshit. But then there were numerous other things that fit into that category. Laura asks, how did you get started working in the media? Was it in college? I guess so. I went to Georgetown University, which at the time had the worst college radio station on the planet, which is really saying something. But I wanted to be a sportscaster. So we did sportscasting, or I did sportscasting, both play-by-play and a talk show format on WGTB, the radio station for Georgetown University, which was literally listened to by nobody. So I guess that's how I started. But then from there, I really wanted to be a TV sportscaster. And after getting my first job out of college, believe it or not, was as an assistant freshman football coach and substitute teacher at Ocean City High School in Ocean City, New Jersey, where I was living at the time. And it was mainly because, in Ocean City, New Jersey, because it's a resort town, in the wintertime, there are no adults there. So there was no one else applying for the job. So that's how I got that. But then I got into sportscasting as a producer, and then as an on-air personality in Steubenville, Ohio, Wheeling, West Virginia, an NBC affiliate there. And that's where my career, I guess, began as an on-air person. The Big O, I guess whose name is Jack, on Twitter. He's one of my biggest supporters on the Penn State Joe Paterno, Jerry Sandusky story. Jack writes, what are your plans regarding the release of the leaked source documents for the spiked Newsweek article, the remainder of the fake accusers' recordings, and the interview with Gary Schultz, one of the administrators from Penn State, who pled guilty to a misdemeanor in an alleged cover-up that did not happen? I wish I had an answer for that, and I certainly understand the question. In a rational world, the stuff that I still have would make a huge impact, but we don't live in that world, and no one gives a shit anymore. The story is too old. The media thinks that they know what happens. The media is invested completely in that narrative like a 5-year-old is with Santa Claus. And my strategy on this, because I know I have zero leverage and I'm not a celebrity, and even though I have the case completely cracked, and the interview with Gary Schultz is amazing. I mean, off the charts amazing. It blows the entire story apart. The fake accuser is amazing. His recordings are amazing. The interview with him is amazing, which we've not also released. The documents prove everything that I've been saying, but no one will believe them because they'll always find some rationalization for not believing because they're 5-year-olds talking about Santa Claus, and they don't want to believe that the fairy tale they've been told is not true. My strategy has always been to leave something in the tank in case somebody becomes interested enough in the story, because there has to be exclusive new content. And by the way, that's partially why I did the Gary Schultz interview and the fake accuser interview via audio as opposed to video, because then if I release them, someone could still say eventually, well, here's the first video interview with this person. I have no expectation that that entity or any entity is ever going to have an interest in putting this all out there, but I can't remotely change anything on my own now. I can further prove what I believe I've already proven, and there's some people who might care about that because they still care about the truth. But as far as impacting events, I don't have the ability to do that. So I need to keep the option open for someone else to do that. I have had meetings with media, I don't know if you call them outlets, but certainly production companies, where we've pitched story ideas, and there have been people who have loved the pitch. But the problem is, this is a story that's almost impossible to sell, especially now that people have largely forgotten about the details, and it's 8 years in the past, essentially, almost. I do think that there's a chance, and this is what I've been pitching, that on the 10-year anniversary, we could get somebody interested from a big media outlet or production company, but I'm losing faith that that's even possible. So the next thing that could even remotely change the equation would be that Malcolm Gladwell has a book coming out in September where he has told me that a chapter of his book is about him revisiting this case and to some extent, to what extent I don't know, believing that what the media told us is not true, and then apparently referencing my work on this. If that's close to what is actually the case, I may try to use that as traction to release some of these audio recordings that I have, the Gary Schultz interview, the fake accuser that got embraced by the main lawyer in the case and the main therapist in the case and recorded all this, many hours of bombshell recordings proving that these people bought into a totally fake and absurd story in a way over many years that illustrates just what a fraud the whole thing was. So I can't guarantee that that's what's going to happen because I don't know what's going to be in Malcolm Gladwell's book. But, the bottom line is, in a rational world, on my computer, I have the greatest documentary that has ever been made on a true crime story, but that no one wants. because we don't live in a rational world, and the world is totally upside down. McNasty asks, what's the strongest evidence so far that finding Neverland? No, it's called Leaving Neverland. Leaving Neverland is bullshit. You really can't do it that way, and that's part of the problem with combating these kind of stories, because one fact is not going to do it. I mean, yeah, there are several that should qualify, but we, the ability of the other side to rationalize is so great that you have to create an entire mural. If you think about it as a giant painting or a mosaic, where you have to basically redo the entire narrative, and that takes, thousands of data points. And now there are several data points that make it pretty obvious. A lot of people focused on the train station story of James Safechuck, where he was abused in a place that didn't exist at the time. For a lot of people, that certainly fits into that category. But there are hundreds of data points that fit. And unfortunately, and this is why when you fight these kind of allegations, it's so difficult, because the other side can always put their allegation in a tweet in 280 characters, and you can't do it because you need all these hundreds, if not thousands, of data points, because the other side has created the rules in a way that make it impossible for you to combat them. I talked about this with Tom Mesereau, Michael Jackson's criminal defense attorney, in the interview that we posted on YouTube and on this podcast a couple of weeks ago. We have another question about what's going on there with I referenced recently that I was planning to have lunch with the Michael Jackson estate, or representatives of the Michael Jackson estate. They're asking, well, did that happen? And if so, how did it go? Let me give you an update on two things there. I mentioned that there would be an event here in Los Angeles that the estate would be part of that would combat some of the allegations in Leaving Neverland, that I had been asked to be part of that. That's not going to happen. The event's going to happen. I'm not going to be part of it. And the short reason why is originally it was scheduled for June the 5th and at night, which was fine with me because I have to be just outside of town in the morning of the 5th, and I could get back into Los Angeles in the evening. They changed the date to the 4th, which made it almost impossible for me to make it. They said it was because some, prominent movie director could only make it on the 4th. I don't know who that is. And I called the guy in charge. I said, well, look, is this worth it for me to try to move heaven and earth to be there? Give me some more details. And frankly, when I heard the details, I was like, okay, this is a waste of my time, because the role that they had for me was kind of actually insulting. And so I don't know if I actually said the words "go fuck yourself," but that was essentially what I said, was "go fuck yourself" in the nicest way possible, because it was rather insulting. Not that I'm a big deal, but this was going to take a lot for me to move things to make it work. So there will be some sort of an event on June 4th, I believe, at UCLA. But I will not be part of it. I wish them the best with that. As far as lunch with the representatives of the Michael Jackson estate, that has been postponed, although it still appears to be imminent, because one of the lawyers involved is in a trial that wasn't certain to occur until it did this week. So we did not, as previously scheduled, have lunch this week, but we are still efforting to put that together within the next week or so. And if it does, I'll let you know how it goes, although I really have no idea what the intent there is. There's got to be some reason why they want to meet with me, and it should be interesting, so I'm more than willing to do it. If that happens, I will certainly let you know what transpires. Maria asks, what are your views on the Me Too movement and the danger of false accusations? Well, I am not a fan of Me Too. I think Me Too is a witch hunt. Like everything else, the pendulum has swung way too far in the other direction. There was a time in which accusers were not believed enough, and now they're being believed against all evidence and all logic, and we're really very close to a Salem situation. And I believe that some people have already been caught up in that. And I think it's not good for anybody. And unfortunately, the news media, I've been one of the very few people that has been willing to stand up and say, wait a minute, this is dangerous, that we're going too far here. behind the scenes, a lot of people in the media agree with me, but they're afraid to say it because they don't want the wrath of Me Too. Because why? It might cost them their gig. And that's the last thing anyone in the media wants to do. It's all about gig protection. And that's why Me Too is one of the reasons why Me Too has been allowed to run amok and go way too far. BJ asks, who were your top 3 Republican picks in 2016 and why? I assume this means who I wanted to win. I thought that the best person to win the election to beat Hillary Clinton was Scott Walker. That most people would think that's laughable now, but I believe that was vindicated by the results. The map that Donald Trump used to beat Hillary Clinton was exactly the map that Scott Walker, the former governor of Wisconsin, would have used to beat Hillary Clinton. Freudian slip there. Winning Wisconsin, winning Michigan, winning Pennsylvania, winning Iowa. Those are the states that Scott Walker would have had a huge advantage over Hillary Clinton. And I think that he would have been a very good conservative, legitimately conservative president. And so he was the first guy. And by the way, there was a short period of time when the Drudge Report and the conservative media was on the Scott Walker bandwagon, but then Donald Trump entered and they abandoned him and actually put him in an impossible situation because he was creating a campaign based upon the idea that he was going to be the front runner, and then all of a sudden he wasn't. And it collapsed completely. My second choice was Marco Rubio, largely because he could win Florida. And because I think he was, a younger guy, good looking, somewhat charismatic, a legitimate conservative, it could appeal to people who were at least somewhat moderate. I thought that Marco Rubio would have beaten Hillary Clinton, and I was vindicated on that as well. Because when you look at the vote totals in Florida, Marco Rubio, against a much better candidate than Hillary Clinton, got more votes than Donald Trump in Florida in the 2016 election. Not in the primary, in the general election. So Marco Rubio would have won, in my belief. After that, I really didn't care about much of it. No one else really excited me, but I wanted just someone who was conservative and could win. I did not believe that Donald Trump was conservative or could win. He turns out he could win. I do still to this day do not believe he was really conservative, although certainly some of the things that he has done as president, specifically in the realm of judges and somewhat in the realm of tax cuts, have been, in fact, conservative. Someone who goes by Pop Culture Theology asks, if you had to vote today for a 2020 candidate, who would it be and why? I'm not sure what that means. I have said on the Individual One podcast numerous times that if Joe Biden is the Democratic candidate and he doesn't pick a complete nut job for his vice presidential candidate and everything else stays the same, I would much prefer him to beat Donald Trump, although I am no fan of Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden is a gaffe machine and a buffoon, but at least he's somewhat normal, and he's probably going to run only for one term, and it's the only shot we have at a reset button for the insanity that has been the Trump administration. Carl writes, your article on the long-term damage to the GOP by Trump was spot on. What will the fallout be for Dems by their lack of action and leadership in the face of such adversity? Are we headed towards a legit third party? I don't think we're there yet. I mean, I think this person is referencing why no impeachment yet. And I do think that there's a balancing act, a danger here for Democrats to not go far enough, just as much as there is for them to go too far in combating Donald Trump. As far as the third party, I've never been a big believer that a third party is viable. There's too much of a monopoly by the two major parties. And while the Trump phenomenon has created some openings, I still don't think that it has fundamentally changed that reality. Scott asks, what will conservatism look like in terms of actual policy relative to government's role, meaning deficits, trade, foreign affairs, immigration, and climate change, when the GOP is in the minority, meaning, I guess, after Donald Trump? That's a great question. I don't have an answer to that. I think a lot of it depends on how this all goes down. Does Trump get crushed, or does Trump barely lose in 2020 in a disputed election, or does Trump win re-election? If Trump wins re-election, I think Trump is the party regardless, forever and ever, because that will be seen as the path to victory. And with a re-election, it'll be a couple of decades by the time, in between the time that a legitimate conservative ran on the Republican ticket and ran even theoretically again after Trump. And that's a huge amount of time. A lot of people have died. A lot of people will have become voting eligible. And so I really think it's an impossible question to answer because we don't know how this is all going to end. You need to know the nature of the ending before you know what the aftermath is going to be. Joy, who is a big supporter of everything I do and much appreciated, asks, have you contacted Britney Spears about her possible support of your work debunking Leaving Neverland following her Instagram post of her dancing to Michael Jackson using Wade Robson's choreography? Well, the subject matter is very on point. However, me contacting Britney Spears, let me see. You know what? I had her cell phone number in my old phone, but I forgot to transfer it into my new phone. So, darn, I don't think I'm going to be able to contact Britney Spears. But if you have Britney Spears' contact information, I would be happy to make that outreach to her. She doesn't live that far from where I live, apparently, but she might not even be allowed to leave where she is, depending on who you believe. The more important part here is that what Britney Spears did this week in a rational world should have changed the narrative about Leaving Neverland. But nobody in the media picked up on it because, one, they're in the tank for this false narrative, and two, because they're idiots! Imbeciles! So let's review. I talked about this last week. It's all about political cover. It's all about getting traction, and this is the evolution of how this happened. Boy George goes on Watch What Happens Live with Andy Cohen. They're both gay. Boy George has doubts about Leaving Neverland. He doesn't get destroyed by Andy Cohen. My guess is Madonna either saw that or heard about it. It's a very popular show among celebrities. Madonna comes out with the Boy George cover and says, basically she doesn't necessarily believe Leaving Neverland. And then just after that, Britney Spears, who's embroiled in this controversy over whether or not she's ever going to perform again, she posts a video which appears to have been somewhat old, which I think actually further facilitates this theory of what she was really doing, because apparently this was taped in March. Well, what happened in March? The Leaving Neverland story was huge in March, and here she is, Britney Spears, who worked with Wade Robson, had an affair with Wade Robson. She posts a video of her dancing with Wade Robson's choreography to Michael Jackson, and in the Instagram post refers to it as Michael and Me. Now, let's use our brains, folks. Britney Spears is saying Wade Robson is full of shit without saying that Wade Robson is full of shit. That's what she's doing. But TMZ did a story on this, and they never even, and this is something that TMZ would usually love. This is what they do, reading between the lines and reading the tea leaves and this kind of stuff, theorizing about this kind of stuff, and they didn't do any of it because either they're that dumb or they're that much in the tank for Leaving Neverland, or both. But I did find that the Britney Spears post was very significant. Skull Bandits on Twitter asks, ZIG, is technology ruining golf? Yes, technology is ruining golf. We're seeing it at the PGA Championship with Brooks Koepka, who at this point is 7 shots ahead going into the final round on what was thought to be a very difficult golf course. It is for everybody else, not for him. I have been saying for a very long time that technology is destroying golf. Tiger cracked golf, maybe put a crack in the foundation, but Brooks Koepka is in danger of destroying golf. And it's basically becoming a video game. And one of the things about golf used to be that, one, you could relate to the players because they look like you. And, unlike other sports like football, basketball, and baseball. And baseball is the same way. Baseball used to have guys who looked like normal human beings. No longer. You cannot relate. I mean, even shortstops. When I grew up, Larry Bowa, 5'10", 165 pounds at most, was my hero because I was a shrimpy little kid growing up in Philadelphia. Larry Bowa could never play Major League Baseball today. He was a very good Major League Baseball player, won a World Series, multiple-time All-Star. He wouldn't even get signed today because the players are that much more athletic. They're that much bigger. The emphasis on power. Well, it's the same way in golf now. And Brooks Koepka is a beast, and he's amazing. But part of why he's able to do this is because the technology allows him to whale away with a driver in a way that previously would not have been possible. because he would have been playing from the trees all day long. Now he's playing from the fairway or just in the rough, and he's strong enough to get it out of the rough. And to me, it's boring. The fear factor is totally gone, which gets you into the mental aspect of the game. Now, you might as well just hook up the best players to a TrackMan device in the range, which is basically just a computer to say how far they're hitting it, how straight they're hitting it, what their spin rate is. And after that, you take the top guys, top 10 to 20 guys on the TrackMan, and now it's just a putting contest. Whoever's putting best that week wins. I don't find that interesting. And so I think golf is in the process of getting ruined. Many of the great courses are not usable anymore because they're too short, and mostly you can't relate to this anymore. Golf used to be the most relatable sport. Now the average guy cannot relate to it at all, and it's only going to get worse because the Brooks Koepkas of the world are going to be the norm going forward. And in retrospect, I think part of Tiger's greatness was that he was basically the first Brooks Koepka going up against a bunch of guys who were just normal Joes with bellies. And not fully, but there was some truth to that. He was basically, Tiger Woods was almost like a Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future. He was Brooks Koepka put into the world 22 years ago, and dominated. Now Brooks Koepka is close to doing the same thing, at least in major championships, that Tiger Woods was under much different circumstances because the competition is a lot stronger, a lot deeper. But I think some of the charm of the game is definitely gone. Andrew asks, when Trump is gone, will the GOP feel a need to rehab itself, or will it continue Trumpism indefinitely? Kind of already answered that with regard to it depends on how it ends. Depends totally on how it ends and what the narrative is at that point. Tommy asks, what are your thoughts on the Ohio State situation? The Ohio State situation is that we talked about this on a couple different podcasts, I guess it was last year, where Dr. Richard Strauss, who was a doctor, has been dead for a long time, was a team doctor for athletics at Ohio State, who, you may recall, this got embroiled with Jim Jordan, the Republican congressman who's a Trump sycophant, the biggest Trump sycophant there is now. And Jim Jordan was a wrestler and a coach at Ohio State. And basically what happened was a couple of guys tried to claim they got media coverage for their allegations against Dr. Strauss by claiming that Jim Jordan knew about this. And I did a lot of research into this, interviewed several people, including the main accuser, talked to him for like 2 hours on the phone, and he's a complete nut job. Total, complete nut job. Well, this week there was a law firm that completed an investigation that was commissioned by Ohio State that shockingly found that 177 athletes had been, quote, sexually abused by Dr. Richard Strauss decades ago at Ohio State. Now, this sounds like, oh my gosh. Okay, let me tell you what really happened here. And unfortunately, this is the way the media works. Once a media narrative gets momentum, especially in this realm, look the fuck out. Let me tell you what really happened with the Dr. Strauss situation, and I feel very confident about this. Dr. Strauss was a gay doctor, all right? And most of this allegedly occurred in the 1980s. And so he's a gay doctor, and he's treating Ohio State athletes, specifically wrestlers. And everyone knew he was gay. He was ogling naked wrestlers. He might have been holding on to their testicles a little too long while giving them the cough test. And I can guarantee you, especially since his first name was Richard, you got a gay doctor named Richard. So Dick Strauss. All right, so think about this. You're in the 80s. You got a bunch of Ohio State wrestlers who are made to feel, let's say, at worst, uncomfortable by this gay doctor feeling up their testicles, giving them the cough test, and making no bones about the fact that he's liking looking at you naked, all right? I can guarantee you that this becomes a joke within the Ohio State wrestling community. There may have been even some Ohio State wrestlers who endured more ogling or if you want to call it abuse, whatever, in exchange for extra drugs from Dr. Strauss. I've been told that, although I've never been able to confirm that. But that was told to me pretty reliably. So you have this doctor who's gay. Everyone knows about it. It's seen mostly as a joke. He did things that were inappropriate and wrong, but there was never any criminal charge, no civil complaint. To our knowledge, there was never a complaint that made it all the way up the food chain, and he dies many years ago. All right, he's been dead since I think like 2005 or something like that. And so nothing ever happened here because this is just one of those things that it was a joke. And back then, you know what? Guys just put up with this bullshit and no one wants to make a stink about it. And it's pretty harmless because it's not like there was actual sex involved here. But now, all these years later, post-Me Too, everything counts as sex abuse. So here's what happens. The two guys at the heart of this, the one that I told you about that I interviewed for a couple of hours and did not find to be credible and I found him to be insane, and another guy who I bizarrely have a connection to because he's from Steubenville, Ohio, and has a horrendous criminal background, including having stolen millions of dollars from his own clients in a federal fraud case that he pled guilty to. Here's what happened. These two guys see what happened at Michigan State with the Larry Nassar case. All these gymnasts being sexually abused and getting paid millions of dollars for it. And these scam artists try to say, well, wait a minute, some of the same stuff happened to us by Dr. Richard Strauss way back in the day. And they're not getting anywhere. So then they decide, you know what? Here's a story that the media will really be interested in. Let's accuse Jim Jordan because he's a Republican congressman. The media hates Republican congressmen. He's a big Trump supporter. So let's get the media interested by going after Jim Jordan. And it works. NBC falls for it, hook, line, and sinker. And so once now the story is out there, all of a sudden people start jumping on the bandwagon. Why? Because they see money. And let's be clear, some of this stuff probably actually did happen. I'm not doubting, and I have never defended Dr. Strauss, except I don't think there's any evidence that Dr. Strauss had an actual sex act with one of these wrestlers or these athletes. So now you have this media momentum. What is Ohio State going to do? Well, Ohio State is a state-run academic institution, which means it's as politically correct as possible. So they hand this off, and they got to do an investigation. So they hire these people to do an investigation. Well, what's the incentive of those doing the investigation and those they're asking questions of? Well, there's no incentive for anybody to defend Dr. Strauss because he's dead. There's no even incentive for anybody to defend the administration at the time because they're all gone. This was 30, 35 years ago. So the investigation asks all these guys. You start to bring in hundreds of former athletes, mostly wrestlers from Ohio State. And you ask them, so did Dr. Strauss ever look at you in a way that made you feel uncomfortable? Did he ever grab your balls in a way that made you feel uncomfortable? Anything happen in the realm of what we now perceive to be sex abuse ever happen? Put yourself in their shoes, folks. You get to anonymously say, yeah, that happened. It made me feel uncomfortable, and I'm pretty mad about it now. And you get to do that with no repercussions. Strauss is dead. There's no even proof any of this occurred, but you now know there's money on the table because of what happened at Michigan State. So, of course, all these, you're going to find 177 people that are going to say, yeah, this gay doctor made me feel uncomfortable. So then they put out a report and they label it sex abuse. Whether you want to define it as that, it certainly wasn't at the time. Maybe it is today. Maybe everything is sex abuse today. But back then it was a joke and treated as a joke. But then now you get reports, 177 athletes sexually abused by Dr. Strauss back in the day. Well, now I'm sure Ohio State's going to cave and give away free money because it's state money. It's not even a private institution. And there's probably some insurance company involved in this. So this is all bullshit. It's all bullshit, but this is how it happens, and you can't combat it because once it gets a momentum, there's no stopping it because no one will stand up and say, wait a minute, can we use our damn brains here? And no one will ever get to the details, which is, you mean there was no actual sex? It's not like there's any proven allegation there was an actual sex act here. Most of this is in the realm of stuff that would have been considered in the 1980s a joke. Inappropriate, wrong. But what's interesting to me about all this is the media is a little bit in a jam because some of the allegations here are a little homophobic. So the media is a little bit confused. Wait a minute. We got a gay doctor who's ogling gay male athletes. It's this one, when they put it into their outrage calculator, they're not sure what the outcome should be. So the media coverage of this has not been over the top, nor should it be. Because frankly, none of this is surprising and none of this is that big of a deal, especially with a guy who's been dead for 13, 14 years. All right. Stefina asks, if you met Dan Reed, the director of Leaving Neverland, what would be your first question you would ask him about the movie? Well, the first question I would ask him is, did you know about Brandy Jackson? Brandy Jackson, who we did the first interview post Leaving Neverland with on this podcast, which I urge you to check out if you've not done so already. She is the niece of Michael Jackson. She dated Wade Robson for 7 or 8 years, including 2 years where he claims now he was being abused by Michael Jackson. How in the world is she not in your movie? My guess is Wade Robson never even told Dan Reed about Brandy Jackson, and my guess is based upon the pathetic nature of his research, he didn't even know about her. Now, he claims that she's irrelevant, but that's ridiculous. That's absurd. I mean, anybody who knows that anything about humanity would know that first of all, leaving that out is consciousness of guilt. If you have nothing to hide, if you're Wade Robson, you would mention this. Oh my God, the most amazing part about this whole thing is I'm dating Michael Jackson's niece while I'm being abused by Michael Jackson. How come you don't mention that, Wade? Because he's afraid of it. Because he knows Brandy's telling the truth. Brandy is far more credible than anyone here, and that none of the damn story makes any sense. In fact, it's
just flat out ridiculous.
The whole thing is. All right, let me see. We're running out of time here. So, in fact, we only have a few minutes left in the hour. So I'll try as hard as I can to answer as many questions as possible, but with the understanding that I may have to do another one of these Ask John Anythings very soon in the future. Let's see. This question from an unnamed person on Twitter. Knowing what you know now about Michael Jackson, has your view on him and the allegations against him changed? Yeah. Because I covered his trial for as a radio talk show host at KFI in Los Angeles, and I presumed he was guilty. I didn't feel that strongly about it. In fact, I remember feeling like, oh man, we gotta do more Michael Jackson coverage today, because it was kind of ambiguous and boring, and I wasn't that shocked by the verdict, nor was I that outraged by the verdict, because frankly it didn't feel like they had proven their case. But that didn't mean that I thought he was innocent. Now, getting into the details, everywhere you turn in this case, it's just bullshit. Nothing you've been told is actually real or proven or even true at all. And when the idea that Wade Robson and James Safechuck are the most prominent accusers of Michael Jackson, to me, that shows you're innocent, because these guys are just not to be believed. They're a joke. And if he really was guilty, the evidence at this point, especially post Leaving Neverland, would be overwhelming. That's the part of this that no one wants to think about. Where are all the other accusations now that Wade and James have come forward? If the Michael Jackson narrative is real, there should be dozens and dozens of allegations, but there's not, because it probably never happened. I think Michael Jackson was somebody who was basically tortured by fame. I think I think that he was mostly what his family says he was. Now, there's still some things that make me a little concerned, that I question, but by and large, gun to my head, I would say Michael Jackson never sexually abused anybody. Bella asks, how do you feel about the MJ fan community after your interactions? I find it odd and telling that Oprah neither mentioned her previous interview with Matt Sandusky to Wade or James, nor had him in the audience. Did you? Yes! Exclamation point, yes. Let me first answer the question about the NJ fan community. I have been very impressed. They are not as perceived by Dan Reed. They're very fact-focused. There's obviously some nut jobs, like in any group, but when you consider how large the group is, I have been amazed by how substantive and respectful the responses have been and how engaged and passionate it has been. I have to say the number one impact this has had on me is that it has given me an even more dim view of the Penn State community than I currently had, because I had been disappointed by the way the Penn State community, especially Joe Paterno fans, reacted to that whole situation. Not all of them, but a good portion of them. Now, after this, I have disdain for the majority of Penn State people. What a bunch of wussy morons. Because Joe Paterno wasn't even accused of anything sexual. I mean, Joe Paterno should have easily been exonerated, and would have been if the Penn State fan base had reacted anything close to the way that the Michael Jackson fan base had reacted, and it pisses me off. As far as Oprah not mentioning Matt Sandusky, I find that to be incredibly telling. And I've always theorized that Oprah, who interviewed Matt Sandusky, did not believe Matt Sandusky. I did a very extensive video, which you can find on YouTube, which is titled "The Overwhelming Case That Matt Sandusky Lied to Oprah Winfrey." I urge you to check it out, because one of the answers that Matt Sandusky gave, in fact, the only tough question he got from Oprah Winfrey, was near the end when he was asked, "How do we know you're telling the truth?" And he completely and totally melted down. I mean, it was comical. It was like a Saturday Night Live sketch they used to do, 60 Minutes and Mike Wallace interviewing people, and the interviewee sweating profusely and smoking a cigarette. I mean, it was actually worse than that. And I know Matt Sandusky is lying. I'm positive of it. It is obvious to anyone who's looked at any of the facts. I mean, he is worse than Wade Robson and James Safechuck. Matt Sandusky, one of Jerry Sandusky's adopted kids. And the idea that she never mentions him or put him in the audience with all these other sex abuse survivors is very, very telling, because it was a very high-profile interview at the time. My gut instinct told me Oprah didn't really believe him, and that certainly is consistent with that theory, because otherwise, my gosh, I mean, it's a perfect dovetail situation. The allegations are almost exactly the same, and Matt Sandusky was nowhere to be seen with regard to leaving Neverland. Kenya asks, name 3 topics of most interest to you at the current moment that you'll be spending a lot of time learning about, and briefly explain why they are important to you. Thanks. I'm not sure. I'm not sure my answer is going to be conducive to what the questioner is looking for, because when I was thinking about the answer to this, let's see, what are the topics I'm most focused on right now learning about? Number 1 is the Star Wars movies, because my almost 7-year-old daughter Grace has become a Star Wars fanatic, and I've never even liked Star Wars. I thought the Star Wars movies are very overrated. It's very obvious that George Lucas was...
He's making it up as he goes along.
And that always bothered me from a movie-making standpoint, but now it's really bothering me as a father, because I have a daughter who's obsessed with Star Wars, which starts with, episode 4, 5, and 6, then it goes to 1, 2, and 3, then it goes back to 7, 8, and 9, and none of it makes any damn sense, because George Lucas was...
He's making it up as he goes along.
So now I have to, on a regular basis, hey, Daddy, can I ask you a question? Yeah? Why does Darth Vader not know that Princess Leia is his daughter? Well, do you want the real answer, or do you want the answer from the movie? Because the real answer is George Lucas didn't know what the fuck he was doing and was just making it all up as he goes along. And then when the movie started, when the movie in number 4 starts, he doesn't think of Princess Leia as Darth Vader's daughter. He adds that later. Same thing with Luke and Leia being brother and sister. And now I gotta spend a ridiculous amount of time explaining a movie I don't even like from I consider George Lucas to be dumb. You ever just seen an interview with George Lucas? He is a dumb person who somehow got incredibly lucky making the most lucrative movie franchise probably of all time in some ways. And so, so I've been spending a ridiculous amount of time studying up on Star Wars. Similarly, with my 2-year-old daughter, who's obsessed with the Toy Story trilogy. So I can tell you everything you want to know about the Toy Story 1, 2, and 3. By the way, that actually at least makes some sense. There's a lot more evidence that they knew what they were doing in making Toy Story 1, 2, and 3 than there is with the Star Wars movies. And now there's Toy Story 4 coming out, which I'm sure is going to blow the whole thing apart, because Toy Story 3 was one of the greatest movies of all time, and they should have kept it as it is, but there was too much money on the table, so they're making Toy Story 4. And then I guess the third story that I'm now sinking my teeth back into is the Brian Banks story, speaking of movies. I'll give you a heads up on this. For those who have really followed me, this won't surprise people. But, and I don't want to get too much into the details right now, but there's a movie coming out in August called literally Brian Banks. And the story is allegedly of this black athlete football player from Southern California, Long Beach, California, who allegedly was convicted of a rape he did not commit, and the accuser recanted, and he lost his football career, and then he got a tryout with the Atlanta Falcons, and now he's working with the Falcons front office, and they're now making a major movie. Morgan Freeman, Greg Kinnear, and it's coming out in August. Well, I researched this because I thought, wow, what a great story. I want to do a documentary about this. This was several years ago, like 2013. And I spoke to the lawyer of the accuser. I spoke to the principal of the school where this happened. I spoke to other people that were tangentially involved in this. I researched the reporting at the time. The story is bullshit. It's bullshit. There's all sorts of reasons I can tell you it was bullshit, but at best, the Brian Banks story is this. Brian Banks had sex with a girl, whether it was consensual or not, who the hell knows, on campus while he was at summer school. He got caught. He was getting expelled, which ended his football career, period. No USC scholarship at that time. It's done. It's over. You're expelled from school going into your senior year. It's over. And I believe there's a pretty good amount of evidence that he actually coerced or even offered to pay for the accuser recanting her allegation of rape, which he confessed to. He confessed to it with a black female lawyer who's now a judge. And now Hollywood's completely rewriting the story and making a major motion picture called Brian Banks. And it's quite possible that I might find myself at the premiere of the movie Brian Banks, assuming that they don't find out who I am before that happens. All right. I still got some other questions here that I want to get to, but I'm going to save them because I don't have enough time to get to all of them. And I'm going to end with this one since I referenced my daughter. Beth asks, how are you going to raise your girls to be independent, strong women with a voice? I have a lot of concerns about where my life is heading from here and, what's going to happen with my family and the country and all that. The least of my concerns is whether or not my girls are going to be independent, strong women with a voice. In fact, if anything, they are too independent, too strong, and have too much of a voice. Let me give you an example. My almost 7-year-old daughter, she turns 7 next week. In fact, she might be on the podcast. We'll see. Negotiations are ongoing as to whether or not we're going to get an interview with Grace Ziegler on her 7th birthday. Grace has absolutely no respect for me whatsoever. She calls me an idiot all the time. She has no problem expressing her opinions on anything. I am basically dirt to Grace, despite my best efforts to be a father who holds the line and tries to enforce discipline and all that. Grace has no problem effectively telling me to go fuck myself. None. So Grace is going to be strong. She's going to be independent, and she's going to have a voice. If anything, we need to tone it down a little bit. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, and I'm all for independent, strong women with a voice, but it's got to be within some semblance of rationality here. My 2-year-old daughter, Diana, appears to be maybe even stronger and more independent and with a greater voice than Grace. Let me give you an example. Diana, who just turned 2, she's speaking a lot for a 2-year-old, but still not fully formed sentences or very few fully formed sentences. This is routine. This happened the other day. So she's playing with her computer that lets her count and also lets her do the alphabet. And so she's playing the alphabet part, A, B, C, D, E. And so I'm singing along with her. A, B, C, D. And she looks up at me, and with a straight face, she says, "Shut up. Shut up." I'm like, okay, all right, we're in big trouble here. My 2-year-old just told me to shut up because I was singing along with the ABCs. She also very routinely will say I'm doing something that's stupid. Stupid. You're stupid. So my 2-year-old tells me to shut up and calls me stupid all the time. So Beth, you don't have to worry about Diana and Grace growing up to be independent, strong women with a voice. Thanks to everyone who submitted their questions for Ask John Anything. As I said, there are still several that I want to get to. Maybe we'll do that, depending on whether we can get an interview with Grace next week on the podcast. But I do appreciate everyone participating, and we'll probably try to do this more often in the future. As always the case, I ask only 2 things of you. Number 1, please make sure you share this via social media, Twitter, Facebook, or Facebook in the English language, word of mouth, what have you. Please do that. That's much appreciated. And number 2, do yourself a favor, and if you're one of those people who sleeps, and when you sleep, you use sheets, please pay attention to this important message. My name is John Ziegler. Our website is freespeechbroadcasting.com.
Coffee?
Oh, thanks.
How did you sleep?
Ugh, like a baby. I don't want to get out of bed. Ever. These sheets are incredibly soft. What did you say they're called again?
Performance bedding by Sheiks.
Performance bedding?
Yeah, they're made from super high-tech performance fabric. They're incredibly breathable, so you're not waking up at night throwing covers off and then an hour later throwing them back on.
Huh, no wonder I slept so good.
Since I started using Sheiks, I sleep like a baby. No more sweaty nights for me.
No?
Well...
Well, I like them because they're soft. They feel like, silk. Performance fabric, huh? Maybe we should... Oh, I don't know.
Try them out again?
Comfort and performance for better sleep. That's Sheiks. S-H-E-E-X. Sheiks. Try Sheiks for 30 nights risk-free. Go to sleepcoolnow.com. Use promo code 1212 and get $40 off any sheet set. That's sleepcoolnow.com, promo code 1212. sleepcoolnow.com, 1212.